Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Shared Services Link and sponsored by Basware. It's also in association with the Everest Group today. Today, we're going to be looking at the 7 main issues facing shared services today, and importantly, how to address them. My name is Sarah Fain, and I am the head of content at Shared Services Link. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Olav Maas, the VP Product Management at Basware. We also have Amy Fong, a partner at Everest Group, and I'll hit Rohitashwa Aggarwal, partner at Everest Group. You, of course, have a very important role to play today as well, and that is to make sure that you get the most out of your time here. We might not see you on these virtual events, but we can most definitely hear you on the chat and in the question box. So please take the time to submit your questions to us. The best way to do so is using the question functionality, which is usually over on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you type your questions to us, we'll get to that in about the last 10 minutes of the webinar. We do have experts on the line today, so please do submit your questions. Just to preempt some of the most commonly asked ones, you will be able to listen to this recording again. It'll be on our site, sharedserviceslink.com, and you will, of course, get these slides. And there's some great charts that you'll probably want to share. So look out for that in your inbox. And if you like what you see, please do help us, share the word, reach out to our speakers today. We do love to hear from you. So let me just take a moment just to touch on the context for the webinar today and why we're addressing this today. In 2023, we have shared services organizations are, of course, facing a lot of the common issues, and that's include things like a lack of buy-in, perhaps poor access to IT hours, or difficulty in knowledge retention. But this year, we're seeing things a bit compounded by some global factors, including economic stagnation, rising inflation, geopolitical instability, the Great Resignation. So many finance shared services organizations are just finding their organizations stressed and their leadership teams struggling for a way forward. So today we're going to be looking at the 7 main issues that we've identified facing shared services today, and importantly, how to address them. So we hope that you walk away with this webinar not feeling alone. It can be a bit isolating in shared services that you have your issues, but how are your peers performing? We want to illustrate the business implication of these issues and really map out a way to address these issues as well. So with that, I'd now like to hand over to Amy Fong from the Everest Group.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and I'm very excited to be here today. As a start, let's talk about the growth of GBS and shared services and the global services sector as a whole. So we've seen really rapid and impressive growth. This chart on the left shows the offshore and nearshore global services market, and about a third of that is GBS or shared service organizations. It's expected to grow another $300 billion in US dollars in revenue by 2023 or within 2023. So quite impressive. That means that probably most of the people on the line today are getting more work to do and being faced with more challenges and trying to mature their model. And I do want to warn everyone, I know there's a bit of data on a few of these slides. Don't worry about jotting that down or screenshotting. You will get the slides for this. We did include some additional data and information just as a reference because we thought that might be helpful to the attendees to take back to your teams. So looking at this, as the sector evolves and grows, what does that mean for shared services organizations? What we have seen is that we have a strong foundation of operational and technology capabilities, and the traditional levels of value that GBS organizations have include things like, starting with labor arbitrage. That was sort of the early driver, but we've built deep process domain, technology expertise, kind of cross-pollinated ideas and practices across different business units, a strong governance model to reduce risk and control your service delivery, productivity, automation, business continuity across the enterprise, across different functions. So a lot of advantages that GBS has brought to their companies over the last couple of decades. But where are we now? What we need to do is add on additional value levers to create value for mature GBS as we move on to the next generation, let's say. And that could be product or services innovation, front-facing things that are client-touching, customer-touching, competitive advantage for the enterprise. It could be internal and external partnerships that bring in capabilities or technologies that you may not have. Being a global hub for really important critical or niche capabilities, and also contributing to top line growth and customer journey. So we're really talking about a much more high value strategic role. And what we've seen in our experience is that a lot of organizations struggle with some of those foundational challenges still as they move to this next level of maturity. And we'll talk about that today. So Sarah, I think you wanted to start with a poll just to see where everyone on the line is right now.
Thank you very much. So coming up on your screen is our first poll question of the day. And we're going to be talking about 7 challenges. But we want to just, before we get into what that is, we want to understand where people are on the line today and if you resonate with any of the following. So do you struggle with any of these following in your shared services organization? Do you have lots of transactional processes and you feel the need to digitally transform? Transform your finance organization as well. Do you find yourself struggling with staff retention or training? Are you unsure about how to mitigate the impact of inflation? Do you struggle with data quality, perhaps master data quality or data throughout the organization? Or do you have lots of complexity in finance and also maybe struggle with some of the complexity in the new compliance landscape as well? So again, you can tick more than one here. It's great to see about half of you voting. And again, so if you just want to tick the options that best match your current struggles at the moment, I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and the results are coming up on your screen now. So interesting to see that all 4 of these really stand out. That the top 3 here, also really 68% for 3 of them. The need to digitally transform, issues with data quality, and lots of complexity are pretty much nearly tied for the top spot there, followed by struggling with staff retention or training, and 50% of you say that. Just 11 are a little bit unsure about the inflation impact. So interesting results there. Just good to get your take on that, Amy, as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised to see in the transactional processing, data quality, complexity of compliance. Those are all issues that I hear all the time. And of course, training and retention and attrition has been such a challenge over the last couple of years, what we've called the Great Resignation. I'm a little surprised that fewer people are unsure about inflation, but I'll take that as a good sign. Either not aware or feel like it's less of an issue these days. Hopefully the latter. But we'll hit on all of these a little bit in the next few minutes. So I'm gonna, so let's start with number 1. We're gonna talk about 7 challenges today. Let's start with the first one, stuck in transaction processing, age old, right? We have trouble moving beyond the transactional. So Ola, why don't you tell us a bit more about this and what you see in your role with Basware?
All right, thanks, Amy. So yeah, I was really happy with the poll. I must say that the number 1 from the poll is also the number 1 challenge that we have in our list, right? So that fits really nicely. And it is true, right? We see that everywhere that within the shared services, we still are very much output focused. We are always working according to certain SLAs that we need to meet. We have very specific output driven metrics, and if we take that from an invoice processing point of view, we're all the time focusing about processing times for invoices and on-time payments, and everything that we do has that mindset of I need to process my invoice fast, and that is really embedded in each and every single user that we're having. Is that this is the question that I ask. I get a document in front of me, and I need to process this fast, and we are not giving us any time to figure out anything else around that topic. So that is definitely the challenge here. And we also see, because of this output driven part, that there is not so much willingness to do the bigger investments in there, because it is the business case is not all the time easily calculated only based on the output. If we just measure output, it may not be that easy. And even with that, I also see with customers that the word automation means something differently everywhere. So very often when somebody talks about automation, it is a sub-automation. It is somewhere in the process, but it's not the end-to-end process. And that doesn't help going forward in that exercise. And that's also why we in Basware, when we start talking about automation, we kind of gave that the name touchless invoice processing. So instead of saying I automate digitizing an invoice, no, we say you should not touch an invoice at all, because that's the ultimate automation. And of course, that is still, we are not 100% there, but that is definitely the direction that you would like to go. And with that, it basically means that if you want to do more with less or with the same, and most probably you're going to be asked to do more all the time, you cannot keep doing the same thing, right? You need to change something, and that brings us then to the actual ways how you can resolve processing these being stuck in the transactions. And one way is from a finance point of view, automate your invoice processes. And this starts now with that mindset change that needs to be with there to go from output driven to outcome driven. What do I want to realize as a shared service center beyond my output metric? And there could be different ways, right? It can be the finance compliance, but it can also be happier suppliers, better supplier relationship for your procurement, or even better utilizations of your employee skills. There can be different kind of outcomes that you would like to achieve to make you go into this direction moving forward. And all of this, the automation will help you, but don't just start automating. That's typically a trap that we see customers step into, that they focus on resolving an issue that they see at hand without knowing what is it actually that I want. So what is my own objectives with automation? So what is really important to get out of it for me? And which data strategy should I apply for that? So automating your invoices can increase your data accuracy quite significantly, and we will talk about that later on here as well, right? So these kind of things you definitely need to consider when you go into the automation area. And at the same time, there's no silver bullet in automation. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, there is a mindset change required as well among the people, that instead of thinking, how do I process this invoice fast? It should be, why do I get this invoice in the first place? Why wasn't this automated? And what can I do about it, right? And that mindset change, empowering people to go into that direction is the way forward. And this is also what we have been seeing with our customers, that they went on this journey, and I put here a few of the key figures, that when you really go on that journey and that end-to-end journey with the automation, that we have customers having 89% touchless invoice processing of their full invoice volume. And the on-time or the processing time is now hours instead of days. So the output metrics increase significantly because of going automation, and at the same time empowering people to go to the next level and focus on why and how can I influence that rather than processing it fast.
Yeah, definitely it's a journey on automation, right? And great point about understanding the upfront. Why do we even have this invoice? Looking at payment channels and requisitioning channels to streamline the whole process. So let's go into the second challenge. And Olaf, I'm going to ask you to take this as well. Tackling the onslaught of financial compliance, and across every industry, really, we've seen whole, complete shifts here and a lot more focus. And so tell us about what you see there.
Yeah, I would say this is the most positive challenge that you can face, right? So the financial compliance that is out there, where governments are bringing out more and more mandates, and EU is coming up with mandates, and everywhere mandates are popping up, right? Especially towards the invoice sending and receiving. So you are being forced to follow according to certain clearing models, and that is all to tighten the control from governments. And of course, that brings rules, that brings complexity. But at the same time, it also gives you opportunities. So we should not only see this as a negative complexity part. The more complex, I would say, is not necessarily the financial compliance with it, but more your business compliance, the expectations that are being set from other teams towards the finance departments to have a better say or more say in what should we really do with it? Can you help me provide certain key measures, key qualities going forward in the strategic decision? So that there is a more wider scope of work that is coming our way, I would say. So if we would go then to the actual resolving of these challenges, then I would like to keep this really simple, right? We should embrace this change. A mandate is work, but it's also a blessing, right? So when suppliers are being forced to send e-invoices, you will get the benefits for that. We see, especially in our Nordics customers, e-invoicing, it's everywhere, right? Everybody's doing it. It's not a problem, but the further south you go in Europe, the more complicated it has been to onboard your suppliers for getting those electronic invoices up front with all the quality improvements that you may have with that. So now this whole struggle of onboarding suppliers is being offered by the government, which is, I think, a great thing going forward. So instead of focusing on getting all of these mandates fulfilled, it's more about building your internal processes and have a tool in place to just go to a country that has the mandate and utilize a service provider to get you the right connections to get this up and running, instead of trying to build everything yourself. Because if you're doing this all the time by yourself, you will spend a lot of time on that, and you will never have the world-class solutions moving forward. So definitely, these are complex things, but are very easily outsourced with high quality, where you get the benefits of the improved data, and you don't necessarily have to worry about the compliance moving forward.
That's great. Great points. All right. I think we're ready to jump into challenge number 3. And the challenge that we have here is the highest inflation in decades. I will comment that it's interesting that not many of you in the poll said this was a high concern. I'm sure there's lots of reasons for that, but I am going to speculate that this might be bigger focus for those of you with outsourced partners that are taking on some of your activities, where you see the impact in a more short term versus just through internal salaries. But Rohitashwa, let's hear about you. What have you seen in this? I know you work with a lot of GBS organizations every day, and how have you seen this impact salary and cost?
And thanks, Amy. And I was a bit surprised myself. And then I was thinking that the specific option we had was about concerns around ability to mitigate cost concerns. And that takes me back to the point that when we did our annual key issues research at Everest Group, cost and pricing pressures were top of the mind. In the context of GBS and shared services, I think it's more about staying competitive. That's a concern. So I can understand why it might not be the top concern that is impacting business, but definitely staying competitive is important. Also, to go through some data that might explain why it's not the biggest concern is what we wanted to show and do a bit of a reality check as well. That, and again, as Amy said, all the slides will be shared with all the attendees today. So we'll just talk through the data and you will get all the slides later. If you look at this, the challenge was maximum in IT. And then when we look at some of the shared services functions as well, for example, finance, and within that, if we look at some of the accounting work, the operating cost on an average increased by about 12% for a location like India. And these are all the calculations in US dollars. So different locations and different kind of impact. However, if you look at the first set of bars in the middle column, the 1% number that indicates the change at a floating currency rate. So a lot of inflation that was witnessed in these markets was also cushioned by the impact of the currency depreciation. In some of the markets, for example, in Latin American markets or even in European markets, some of this impact was actually a little bit in different directions, and either favorable for companies at the end because they are consolidating their books of accounts in US or Europe, UK region, or the impact from these offshore market locations and inflation was largely mitigated So definitely that's a bit of a reality check as we compare it against the inflation in some of the source market from where the work is moving into shared services, then kind of the narrative starts falling into place. However, it is still important given the current situation to look for opportunities to optimize costs. So as we move on and look at some of the best practices, right? So there are two parts there. One, if we look at the long-term projections, this was the data till now. Let's look at what do we expect going forward. So as we look at that, you will see that our analysis shows that the arbitrage, the cost advantage of shared services model, particularly from offshore nearshore locations, is looking very promising. And despite all the inflation concerns, it is kind of holding strong. However, there are immediate concerns in the next 3 months to 12 months. You need to get control of some of the costs. So we have some recommendations and best practices for you next. And essentially, we are structuring them as do's and don'ts. So three areas where we see currently a lot of room to optimize shared services cost structures is one, the real estate requirements opportunity to downsize, especially as you're looking at more distributed workforce, more hybrid workforce. A lot of companies have been in decision paralysis in this area, but right now is the opportunity to take a stand and then kind of do some optimization. The other two I find fairly more interesting. No, the first is Amy mentioned to the Great Resignation period. I would assume that a lot of you also went through a rapid, desperate hiring phase, where not necessarily, the hiring happened for the best of the skills and at the ideal cost structures. So looking for things which are not falling in pattern, looking for things which are not optimized, and right now it's a bit of a cleanup opportunity for organizations. Nothing that impacts the quality of the teams you have, but there were some desperate decisions made which were not necessarily ideal from a talent proposition. So how can you identify and improve on some of that? That is important. However, and we saw this during the poll also initially, talent availability remains a huge challenge. We'll talk more about it. It's a challenge that we'll cover. But even when it comes to cost optimization initiatives, we would advise caution against any investment in your employee engagement and L&D initiatives. Anything that you are doing to invest in your skills. All I've also talked about how the nature of skills required is evolving because of the more compliance needs, more complexity in the processes that shared services are delivering. So investing in your talent needs to remain a priority and should not be an area you should look to optimize costs.
Yeah, thanks, Rohit. I think that's a great point. I mean, when things get tight, the first reflex is to cut back on costs, and it's so easy to cut back on costs that impact your talent, and that's not the place to go right now, right? So let's go on to the next challenge, and that is the complexity of the work that shared service teams and GBS organizations are facing. And it's become more and more complex, and we need to rise to the occasion. But how do we do that? Rohit, maybe take us through what you see working here.
All right. So
I'm sorry.
well, I guess yeah. So we kind of touched this briefly already, right? We have been seeing that the world is far from static. There are so many things happening around us all the time. So we've had a little bit of COVID wave that caused a little bit of hassle, and then we are now having these economic situations, instability, inflation. There are lots of things happening around us, but then there's also things happening within the actual business environments. As an organization, you're also not static. There's always something happening, whether it is a merger or acquisitions, divestments, maybe expanding to new countries, the mandates we already briefly mentioned. So there's a lot of things happening around us that is adding complexity one way or another. And I would also like here now to make the bridge towards the previous topic about the inflation. I would say that is one of the complexities now as well, right? That is added. So now that inflation is so high, everybody's asked to be cost cautious. do I need really to spend this? So spend management is becoming more and more important right now in the decision-making process. And who are we looking for? Well, of course, we are looking at the AP departments because they are getting the spend in through all of the invoices that we are doing. So all of a sudden, more complexity is also getting into that area. And then there's also other kind of factors still out there, like the ESG. Also, that is only growing in importance. It is the carbon footprint. It's no longer a feel-good metric, right? Like the last couple of years, if you would be able to report a number, it would really show a benefit that, hey, you are a green company. But these regulations are tightening. There are also coming mandates for that to really report on a granular level. So also, that is going to be another mandate that is coming around the corner, adding complexity going forward. And that's not easy to manage. And the only way how to resolve this challenge would actually try to be, or not even try to be, as a man, I can say try to be flexible, because that is not my strong point, being flexible, at least from a joint point of view. But that's the only way, right? So how can we be flexible enough and have the agility and the resilience to moving forward? And part of these things we can cope ourselves. So if I know that as an organization we are all the time on an merger and acquisition path, then I can prepare myself for that. So I know then what I'm expecting from my people. I know what kind of processes I would need to go through. And I also know then how do I do that from a systems point of view. And if I, again, take that as an example from AP, because that's kind of an easy example with merger and acquisitions, if you acquire something, invoices need to be paid, right? Whether you have a similar process, yes or no, but you need to pay your supplier invoices in the end. And in order to actually have a shared services up and running, you need harmonized processes, preferably, because that's where you get your efficiency moving forward. And that's not easy if you have a landscape with multiple ERP systems. It is very difficult to get that harmonized process across different kind of systems. So here, if you know that you are in this path, an overlaying platform, bundling all of your AP invoice and connect that to your ERP systems is a much easier way to set yourself ready for these kind of complex and dynamic organizations, because then you can just take the process in and connect the invoices, and you don't have to care about the full ERP integration, which is a much longer implementation, I would say, before you have a full integration done. So this is really how you can still work on uniform processes. And the same applies basically to the people, right? I mentioned already earlier that we should start thinking it from what can I do to prevent this from happening, right? Really take that automation approach to these kind of things. So also for your people, you need to get the people in and retain the people that have that resilience and flexibility in their ways of working to cope with these kind of things. And at the same time, empower them to work according to these continuous improvements. So take them on board, make them grow with it, rather than having a top-down approach. This is now the way it is, and continue like that.
All right, thank you. Great points. And this is definitely, I love the concept of more agility makes you more resilient. I think that's a good takeaway for all areas. All right, so I think we're up to number 5 here. Let's talk about our 5th challenge, and I'm going to take number 5 here, and that is that teams struggle a lot with where to start when they're navigating digital transformation. So Olaf has given us some great examples of where digital transformation can really help you overcome these challenges. But where do you start? The challenge that we've seen is just lack of ownership, lack of challenges with internal capabilities, and resistance to change, and those can really hold back your transformation strategy. So let's look at some of the data that we've gathered over the years. When we've asked organizations about their finance processes, what we found was that even in the most mature functions, finance and accounting being one of them, only about 31% of GBS organizations had achieved end-to-end standardization. So what that means is you're starting from a point where your processes are very disparate. You may not have an end-to-end view. You may not have the same business rules across business regions or business groups or regions or geographies, and you may not have harmonized or standardized at all. That's a real challenge. We also see as other challenges just the concept around lack of ownership, resistance to change, and a lot of internal culture and ownership challenges that can hold this up. So moving beyond the process issues, it may just be very difficult for the team to get to the point where they feel that they're empowered enough to drive a new process, to bring on new technologies. And technology is, although technology and digital transformation are about the tools and the information, they're also about change management and project management and really upskilling your own capabilities. And that takes quite a bit of confidence that may not always be present in every organization. So let's talk about how to address this challenge. Digital transformation is really a journey that starts with change management and it ends with business value, or never really ends, but it leads to business value. A couple of the things that I've seen really effective in the digital transformation of GBS organizations. One is having an end-to-end process owner go across functional lines. Purchase to pay is the most common process, where often it's half procurement, half owned by finance. And I have been in organizations where the buyers have never talked to the AP clerks. They are in the same building and they've never even met. So you need to get past that. You need to have people collaborating to drive almost any kind of change, both process, policy, technology. Really important to do that. And then engaging your change management resources as well. Most large companies have a change management team. I very rarely see those change management resources really leveraged to their full potential, bringing those experts in to help you through the journey, help people understand not just where you are, but where you're trying to go and what all the steps are to get there, right? Build that path and that transformation roadmap. When you think about a business case, think about the value that you're driving. This isn't just about process cost cutting. We're long past the days where technology, a tool with Bassware, is just about process costs. It's really about getting more visibility, about streamlining the process, and about accelerating the business. And we talked up front about some of those more strategic goals that are really customer-facing, revenue-facing ways that you can support the business. I think anytime you're doing an implementation, it's really important to ask your partners what kind of change and project management resources they bring to the table. In some cases, that could be resources you use internally, change management, project management. It could be with your tech provider. I've seen many tech providers that partner with other firms to bring in those kind of resources as well. Also, make sure to use the tool to standardize processes across BUs. And across regions. So, make sure that you're using automation as that lever to drive that. It's just one excuse or one lever you can use to kind of force standardization, even when it seems impossible. And typically that means, use the processes that are built into your tools out of the box or recommended by the provider. Exceptions should be exceptions and not the rule. All right, so assuming digital transformation journey is started, what's another challenge? We're up to number 6 now. So number 6 is really that dirty data. That we often see shared services organizations are dealing with incomplete data, dirty spend data across a lot of different systems. Typically, there's a lack of data governance and just a history of poor data quality, and that can really prevent teams from transforming and having quality insights. So what do we do with this in terms of the strategies to address this? We've seen some of the challenges around technology. The top one was just the lack of data standardization, lack of structuring, challenges with access. If you can't get into all of the systems, you can't access legacy IT systems, or you can't actually clean up the source of the data. Lack of the technology solutions you need. And then often there's challenges when you're working with external agencies as well with data access issues. So all of this kind of compounds to, around this problem. A few suggestions that we have seen effective in addressing the challenge here. The technology that we have today has really moved data management to a completely different level, and you have to think about this differently than you have in the past. But getting the right structure of data, getting clean data, and then putting in long-term data governance is incredibly important. So first of all, you need one source of the truth. You need one data lake, database, whatever you want to use, whatever you call it, one data source across your process, let's say across P2P, across other functional processes, that supplies all of your tools instead of having multiple databases. Your spend data should be your spend data, your customer data should be your customer data. You can't have different tools with different sources. They need to all come together and then pull from that one core layer of data. Also avoid system fragmentation. So look for your platforms, choose platforms, whether they're best of breed or they're a suite or whatever they are, they need to be able to connect to other tools with APIs. We're long past the days where you have to build an integration with an ERP for every tool you add. So that helps, that gives more flexibility in selecting the tools that we use. But it also means that you need to build those, those connections or bring those connections in as smoothly as possible so that you are using all the same data. The tools we have today, when we think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, they can cleanse and enrich data faster than we ever did in the past. So it used to be that if you were trying to do a spend analysis, plan on at least a quarter to cleanse your data and get some insights from it. That should be days now. In some cases, it should be hours. In some cases, with generative AI on top of that, you can actually start to see the insights a lot faster. So we're starting to see, for a while, we've seen that time accelerate to clean data, just to visible spend data, where you're spending your time making decisions and not cleansing the data. I think that the advances that we've seen just in GPT over the last few years, few months, weeks even, are going to quickly accelerate that. It's probably one of the best use cases for AI in source to pay. And then, of course, really focus on better data, making better decision making. That is the justification for tech updates. It's not just that we have better data for the sake of data. That doesn't make sense. What you need is better decisions that are going to lead to better business outcomes, and that should trickle through your entire business case for any of the things that we've said today, but incredibly important. All right, so we have one last challenge. We're up to number 7, and I want to reveal that. The last challenge that might be close, top of mind to many of you, and it seems like it from the poll, is just retention and training. Challenges around talent in shared services and GBS. And Rohit, I know that you work a lot in our talent excellence program. Talk to us about what you're seeing, be the challenge here, as well as how you help GBS organizations overcome that.
Hey, thanks again, Amy. Some great points on the previous two issues as well. And I think it all comes down to talent in the shared services construct. A shared services at the end of the day is a services organization, and it's only as good as the talent they deploy, and how can they create talent for future demands ahead of the demand. The biggest challenge we see right now, despite operating in a lot of high population locations. So shared services are operating in markets where there is a lot of demographic dividend, but still struggling to hire the talent. And as you will see on this slide, we look at demand supply gaps for various types of skills very regularly. And the data here is from Q1 of 2023 for a contact center voice-based work as a representative of the BPO market. And I'll not explain every data point, it's fairly complex, but we are right now representing what's the attrition level and what's the unmet demand, is the current number of openings that are still there in the market. And you will see a lot of red there, which is never good for employers. And the problem is multifold. So one of the problems that we were highlighting in the previous page is also employers are still hiring to fill positions for the work they need to do today. The focus on having a clear taxonomy of skills they are going to require 3 to 5 years down the line is not there with most of the companies. In fact, our research shows that about 50-70% companies don't have that clear taxonomy. In addition to that, the movement of the talent from their current position to the future position is also a problem. As a result, everybody tries to go after skilled workers that can perform the task from day one. And we saw a lot of that failed during the Great Resignation period in 2022 because that sort of talent is limited in supply. And even there, coming into a new organization, all have talked about how we are constantly absorbing a more complex scope of work. So there is a continuous need to upskill and create the talent that you need versus hire it from the market. It's simply not available at the scale it's needed. So let's talk about some of the steps organizations can take to address this challenge, right? Uh, Firstly, companies have to think creatively about their talent acquisition. Shared services, some of them are pretty large organization, multiple thousand employees across different locations that they operate in. How can they think about internal fulfillment of their hiring goals, especially to move the employees from one pocket to another, where it is especially difficult to hire externally, and but it may be easy to refill the other talent pocket from the market. There are often these challenges that the employees are not completely skilled or project ready. But during the Great Resignation period, we heard that about 40% of employees that were hired did not have the right kind of project delivery skills. A large portion of them, there was a long hiring period, there were a lot of dropouts. I understand right now the situation seems to be getting better, but there is a bad news. If people believe the problem will solve itself, it will not. There is a structural gap in demand and supply. So look internally and see if your employees are in the best position they need to be, or you can leverage them better in other places. What this also needs is a well-defined journey from their current talent, current role to the future needs. So how do you really break it down? Not by dividing that I have X number of FTEs in AP or AR or general accounting and so on and so forth, but exactly breaking it down to the nature of the work these employees perform. What are the different types of skills they have, competency levels, and what are you going to need in future? Hence, which employees need to be upskilled and then move to the new role. As you do that, the having a comprehensive skilling program is very important. We have seen a continuous increase in spend on internal L&D, in addition to the standard investments every company makes when they hire new employees, but dedicated spend on creating new dedicated specialist skills. In fact, as you were talking about the previous challenge number 6, how do we deal with irrelevant data that is not useful? One of the biggest challenges that shared services organizations face, Amy, is also about their employees don't know what questions to ask when they have a lot of data in front of them. So a lot of investment needs to go in training shared services team on the kind of business context, the domain, the problems that their organizational leaders are facing, because they need to get into their shoes. And as they move to do more complex jobs, move away from transactional work, a lot of technology solutions that all have talked about are coming in. So there is that change in the role from execution of tasks. You need to become more of a problem-solving partners for the business. And to do that, a lot of skilling investments are needed. Lastly, shared services need not do all of this themselves. There is a rapidly maturing, fairly large ecosystem of external partners in various shapes and forms, whether it is training intervention, learning solutions, content creation. So we are seeing organizations, probably this is still not an 80-20, but mostly a 60-40 or 70-30 rule, where they can get a bulk of this support externally at very reasonable investments, and then work internally to contextualize this. And we have seen multiple organizations get really accelerated results out of that. Lastly, if we look at just breaking this down into 3 steps where we see most of the gaps currently in the shared services GBS construct. So just to reiterate some points I already made. 1, make sure you do a gap assessment and planning which is not focused on how many seats you need and for which team, but what skills you need at what competency level. Define these roles clearly. We are all to blame jointly, but in terms of using all the fancy titles, introducing a lot of ambiguous job descriptions, market is a bit fragmented right now, where employers are not really sure what they are hiring, and employees are not really sure where they can go to. So having a bit of a clean role definition, alignment both internally and with external markets is important. The traditional way how taxonomies were structured with skills should sit together. Some of that has evolved over time, especially as more automation and other technology interventions have come in. So having clarity on that is important with future future perspectives. And lastly, having contextualized role development journeys, what you have and what you're going to need. It is not as important if the market is going to need X type of skills, but if those transformation are not part of your roadmap for the next 3 years, then you are not going to benefit from investing in those skills if you're going to be operating on a different ERP or ecosystem. So very contextualized role requirements and skill requirements, and then intervention journeys. And you also see some data at the bottom. A large number of organizations do not have a programmatic approach to this, and that contributes to a lot of challenges, which are often voiced over as a lack of employee interest in upskilling, reskilling. So it is a mandate that shared services leaders need to take, how they will articulate the need and the benefits of upskilling, reskilling to their employees. And we have seen that work much better. And going back, this is the last point I'll make, is that talent supply demand gaps are structural. The situation is a bit under ceasefire right now, but as soon as big tech starts hiring again, things will go crazy. So make sure you invest in the right areas, and you are relatively more prepared to tackle the talent demand internally, not completely reliant on external markets.
Thank you. I like the term ceasefire that we're in right now. I think we all know that the hiring or the competition and attrition has maybe slowed a little bit, but I agree it's going to come back, right? There's an inevitable demand for especially for tech roles. All right, so thank you. So that was 7 challenges. I want to wrap this up, and we'll just reiterate what those were. 1 was that we were stuck in transaction processing. 2 is the complexity of financial compliance. 3 is driving costs up from inflation. 4 is the complexity of work increasing. 5 is the challenge in navigating digital transformation. The 3rd was dealing with dud data. And then the last one that we just talked about was staff retention and training. I think all of these probably have touched most of the people on this call, I would think. And hopefully we've given you some useful tips for where to start and how to work through this. I want to wrap up just by looking at kind of the maturity that we have kind of diagnosed or described in shared services and GBS organizations. So as you start to unlock these new levers of value creation, organizations are able to deliver more impact and expand the role that they play. And we see organizations moving from a cost advantage. Remember, we said we started with labor arbitrage up to a more operational efficiency mode, driving business agility, and then finally a customer centricity, revenue, competitive advantage. And the impact increases as you go through these different roles. There are some personas here that we've described: arbitrager, service provider, consolidator, transformer, integrator. We have a lot more on that. Not going to try to define each of those, but I think that you can get a pretty good idea here that your traditional value levers have to maintain and grow through this process while you're still increasing the additional value levers, the COE type value levers that we've hit on today. So it's a challenge. We all have a challenge ahead of us. Hopefully this conversation has made you feel a bit more empowered and given you a couple of takeaways. Sarah, would you like to, do we have any questions that we can move on to?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, lots to learn here today, lots to digest. So thank you so much for your time today. We do have some questions we'll be turning to. So if you haven't yet asked your question, again, the best way to do so is using the little question functionality on the right-hand side of your screen. We've got about 10 minutes, and if we don't get to your question today, I'm sure the team would be happy to follow up with you as well. Just as we go into our first poll question, our first question, I'm just going to also just have a little thing up on the screen here. If you want any further follow-up information from the team at Basware today, you can tick one of those boxes. But I'm going to, Olaf, turn to you for the first question that's come in that you mentioned in your presentation. You've seen organizations with very high rates of touchless invoicing, touchless processing, about 89%. If we've been in organizations kind of stuck in the 30 to 40% automated range, and I feel like we're getting by as are many of our peers, and I'm not actually seeing many people get above that range. Can you help maybe just paint a picture for what life is like for organizations that do achieve that 89%, and kind of how does that world look different from organizations that are in the 30 to 40% who have taken a lot of the pain out but are certainly not totally automated? Olaf, if you want to just check your sound.
Can you hear me
Yes.
now?
Yeah, I can now.
Yes.
Yep.
Good. So yeah, this is not an unexpected question, let's say like that. So yeah, clearly 89 is really high, and these are like the top class, right? And they really went to a lot of effort to make it happen, and it basically touched many of the challenges that we started with today. So there was a certain start of automation. So they had, let's say they did order matching, which from an invoice processing, that is one of the ways how you can automate. But then looking in how do you actually measure the success of matching, there were different ways how customers have been looking at it. So is it the match is done automatically, but I still have a difference? Is that good or bad? And from our point of view, it's still bad if you need interference. But it starts really with that visibility. So having that data, what is going wrong, to get the answers to the why is the starting point. And that is what often is lacking. So even if we are at 30 or 40%, I would almost like to ask the question back, like, do you know why that 70% is failing? Who is that? Is it a specific type of spend? Is it a specific type of suppliers? Is it because of invoice content? So there can be so many different reasons. And of course, there are different factors where you can then play with to increase that. So the e-invoicing, that's definitely one. Then there is machine learning and AI solutions that will help you with data enrichment, which will help downstream with the automation as well. So all of that would then require you to have the insights to really go that step. That is like, it doesn't happen overnight, right? That is really the journey, and a lot of change management and a lot of hard work where you need to really make decisions. Yes, this is the way, and get that end-to-end process and empower people with it.
Thank you very much. Another question that's come in, Olaf, I'll loop you in and then also maybe turn to, I think Amy might want to take a stab at this as well. Olaf, you also mentioned when you're working with multiple ERPs, but having uniform processes. I mean, how are you seeing organizations use tools like Basware as well to get towards a situation where they have uniform processes, but they have multiple ERPs? I think this listener maybe doesn't quite see the way forward when juggling multiple ERPs and getting a uniform process.
Okay, yeah, so the challenge with multiple ERPs is that there are multiple teams running on those ERPs, and everybody has its own fair share of how to create. Let's take again the purchase order creation now as an example from a P2P point of view. So you need to create a PO in order to automate your invoice, because matching will help on that one. Having that done in a separate process doesn't need to change in order for your invoices to be automated. So if you would be able to elevate your invoice process to a harmonized platform, you just take that whole process that is happening in ERP on the PO creation, that difficulty you leave at the ERP, and you only take the invoice process into the automation part. So you take the data from the end product from the PO and you use that to harmonize an invoice processing place. And then it becomes more or less a standard process of how to match an invoice with the PO. Is probably easier standardized across different kind of ERP systems because it's a PO and an invoice. And this is how you then can go forward.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to what Olaf said. I've seen a lot of different kind of models to do this, but it's pretty common to have the P2P process happen in a separate system, like a Basware type system, and then have the payments happen out of the individual ERPs. That I've seen commonly done. So there's a number of different ways, but by having a few common systems for the PO side or for the requisitioning or for the invoice, and then being able to match and then pay out of whatever ERP is relevant. That generally is one, I don't want to say workaround, it's a solution that can work long term.
Thank you. So we are nearing the hour, but I think I'll put this last question to Rohit, if that's okay. Where's Rohit, you mentioned organizations not training for and hiring for skills kind of 3 to 5 years down the line and kind of looking to solve their problems now. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but could you maybe just paint a quick picture of what are the skills that maybe people are overlooking, and if they are looking, what are the skills they need to be planning for 3 to 5 years down the line?
Yeah, and then Sarah, again, 3 to 5 minutes is really a short time. But if I were to just take a break this into categories, right? So when we are looking at some of the traditional shared services functions like finance, HR, supply chain, etc., the real challenge is that we are not looking at fundamentally replacing the workforce with a very different type of workforce, but essentially training these employees to be less kind of dependent on execution of rule-based tasks versus more problem solving, stakeholder management, more cross-functional collaboration. So the softer side of the skills is kind of more important, working on more complex areas, building more of the business context, more functional expertise. So there's a lot of upskilling focus that is required within that versus net new hiring. And then to the extent possible, hire employees with certain industry experience is always helpful. Then there is the second bucket where we are adding a lot of more complex niche work, marketing, legal, real estate. We are thinking about, we are seeing, shared services add a lot of operations work. So in retail, it could be about store management, merchandising. Similarly, in healthcare, pharma, insurance, other industries, right? That is where looking outside of the traditional processor roles to roles which are kind of more aligned to what the company's business is in these respective areas. So do you need people who are experts in execution of tasks versus marketing as a skill, and then train them on how to do it for your company. And then there is an entirely different area of technology space where it is more about what are the new and upcoming roles that you need to build. There is a dual focus, one on what are the next gen skills in 3 to 5 years, a lot of metaverse enablement, AI, Internet of Things, etc. But also staying within the remit of the organizational CIO charter. So if your organization is still going to work on some traditional platforms, then you need to have those skills and a clear strategy on what you're building internally versus sourcing from outside. We do very extensive work in each of these areas, so happy to continue the conversation offline with those who are interested. But what you need to really contextualize is what is the line of scope that your shared service is going to follow, and the services that you're going to deliver with what kind of technology enablement, and then do you have the right skill set or not.
Well, thank you very much. We are now nearing the hour, so I just want to say a really big thank you to Olaf, to Amy, to Rohit for a really fantastic presentation. I always learn so much from having you on the line. So really just want to say again, thank you to you and your teams for helping us put this together. And a really big thank you to everyone on the line today. I know we can't see you, but we can feel you. And thank you for participating on all the polls and asking thoughtful questions. So really love to see you here today. And we hope to see you at some of our forthcoming webinars as well. So again, if you want, we will send the presentation. Feel free to reach out to us and the team, and we hope to look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.